We've reached a stage where we need to be more than green, more than sustainable. We need to become regenerative, not just energy efficient buildings or better agriculture. We need better than sustainable developments. We need to go into regenerative development. We need to reverse the damage that's been done to the earth.
Hello and welcome to the Regenerative Design Podcast. I'm your host, Mathieu Mehuys, and in this show, I interview the leading authorities in the world of regenerative practices. People who do good and do well. Are you a person that cares about your environment and our planet? Are you a person that wants to leave the planet to our children to be something that we can be truly proud of? Something to enjoy for many generations to come. But are you also a person that believes we can do all of this and do good in business? Well, I have really good news for you. You're here listening to the podcast that is all about making our planet a better place and making your business more successful. Enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Regenerative Design Podcast with your host, Mathieu Mehuys. Today we have another great guest. His name is Frederic Pouyot. He's the Dean of the International Real Estate Development Institute. He's also the President of the Board of Directors at E3 Habitat, a company that's focusing on creating regenerative materials for the construction industry. And he's also the CEO of GPEKS, another company that's actually focusing on real estate developments, also energy production and transportation. So that's a whole mouthful. Frederic, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
Excellent. Thank you so much for having me. I'm really glad and excited to be on your show.
Yeah, me too. We already had a bit of a conversation before this episode, so I really admire the work you do when it comes on to green development. Now, we'll definitely dive deep into that today about how people can actually start developing green infrastructure for higher economical profits as well. So I'm very curious to go there. But first off, tell me your backstory. Where did everything start? Like, how did you grow up and how did you come to be the man you are today?
Well, I was born and raised in France. I was born in the center of France, in the Massif Central region. I grew up, my family was very sensitive to the environment. My father was revolted against nuclear energy in France, and I think that had an impact. I was quite concerned, actually, when I grew up, seeing the number of incidents. And as you may know, like France had actually the per capita, the most nuclear capacity installed in the world. Not the biggest in total capacity, but bigger than Japan or per capita or the US, which has a lot of coal, which France pretty much banked all out on nuclear energy. And that scared me. And I was also, when I grew up, when I saw the pollution, from the factories and all that was something that really touched me, and just wanted to do something about it. So that prompted me to study in the area of green building and green energy. And so that's how I started. Then I realized that if I really wanted to make an impact, the problems were not so much technical as they were business-wise. So there was a need for awareness. So I thought I should go into business. So after studying architecture and engineering related to green building, I went to business school, and then I started to work. I worked for the largest solar energy company in France, Solaire de France. I actually was hired to do the one of the biggest campaigns for solar energy.
Wow.
I was approached when I finished university. I was approached by the association. Our university was approached by the Solar Industry Association at the time, called Helioplan. And so I volunteered. I said I was interested, and I met them, and So they had a
In what
budget.
year was that,
That was in
roughly?
the
Or
80s.
in the
Yeah,
80s already doing
early
solar. Wow.
yeah. So I got a budget, and so I did basically I they give me a budget for transportation, but I actually bought a truck, a little truck in which I put solar energy equipment, and I organized and reserved on 55 places, public places. From Monte Carlo all the way to Spain, all along the coast. And every day at 5 o'clock in the morning, I was in public markets, organizing displays. And so I had spent a few months, first of all, from Marseille. I was the association was located in the Palais de la Bourse in Marseille, just on the Vieux Port de Marseille. It was a very
Nice.
interesting experience. That's why I did all the organization there with the president of the Helioplan at the time. And then then I basically got my truck and got all the manufacturers to double up the government subsidy that was available through the association, and also to give equipment to display.
Mm-hmm.
And so I went on public places basically, and I spent the greatest part of the day doing that for 55 days. And as a result of that, the largest solar energy company was so impressed with my passion and my dedication on that they hired me right away.
Wow.
And we did the
So
way
that
we.
was first on a voluntary basis, and only then you got the job. Or
No, I was actually paid. I was paid to do the. I was well paid actually to do
nice.
that campaign, but
Then you got another formal position in the company.
and yeah, but that was a contract.
Mm-hmm.
So that was just a temporary job, contract type of thing. So I was not an employee; it was a subcontracted. So I did that, and then I realized, well, really, if I want to really make a big impact, I really need to spread the word internationally. So I went back to school. I went to school in university in Nice, where I studied two things there. Actually, I studied international trade at basically a branch of the Institut d'administration des entreprises called ITEX, Institut des techniques d'exportation.
Mm-hmm.
And at the same time, also, I studied international public policies at the European Institute for High International Studies, which is actually a Belgium-based organization. None of this exists, but they had two locations, one in Belgium and one in Nice, France.
Nice.
So I studied at the time the policies of the European economic zone and all that. And that's or they had actually Europe the way it is right now. Because I thought it was also important to understand public policies and to influence them.
Yes.
And when I finished my school, which by the way I just came out top of the class with special honors from the dean of the school.
Nice.
And, it was great to get recognition. Especially since I was doing those two programs at the same time. Same thing actually when I did my business school. So I did the business school in half the time and got a Lions Award for my the ability to just do the work that I did there, while also actually working at night I was working in basically a guard, like security guard.
Oh yeah.
For some type of institution.
Wow. So you could study as well as you were probably guarding a little bit.
Very bad, yeah. So I was able to sustain myself.
Crazy. Wow.
Yeah. And so at the end of my studies there on international trade, then I did an internship for a company in France that was actually the third largest in its field. It was not really to renewable energy, but it was a commercial refrigeration. They were so impressed by the work that I did that they hired me after 3 months of basically doing my internship. They hired me as a marketing manager for North America, and they paid for all my stuff to be shipped to Canada. Put my things in a shipping container and just very interestingly, that one of the first contract that I worked on was for the the fisheries of Baffin Island. So I make a joke that I came to Canada to sell ice machines to Eskimos. But actually, now we can't say Eskimos anymore. We have to say Inuit or whatever, the Aboriginal people. But yeah, at the time that was the term used.
Yes.
And just went from coast to coast. They're setting up dealers and all that. And
Wow. What an adventure.
yeah, it was interesting. And the idea was that this was the base. Actually, Canada was the base to expand toward North America. And after a couple of years, what happened? Actually, the company grew so fast that they choked out of cash flow. And so I saw that coming, and I quit because I was not able to. At some point, I realized I was not going to be able to, become successful there without They couldn't give me what I needed. Like it was in terms of getting also the CSA, the Canadian Standard Association rating, like the technical support there. So, anyways, so I then started. One day I was jogging and I just I went by a place called Land of Software, and I've always been fascinated by computer and IT and stuff like that. So when I was in business school, I had taken also some night courses in IT. So I just went there in my jogging suit and asked them if they could need some help in whatever capacity. And so they hired me initially. My first job, that was just assembling computers in the bathroom. They were doing computers. They were actually the largest Epson dealer in Canada. And Epson at the time was the largest printer company in the world, but they also were selling computers.
Wow.
And very quickly, after a few months, I started to get on the sales floor, and I became the top salesperson there for the company. And then I started to provide more and more consulting to high net worth individuals that would just ask me to come and set up their computer and teach them how to use the computer and all that.
Wow.
And I started. They had also that organization had a training center. So I started to take courses and all kinds of things, and accounting and finance and productivity tool, desktop applications, whatever. And then I started to teach.
So that was a whole in the IT revolution around even before 2000, I imagine.
Yeah. So yeah, that was basically 1989, 88, 89. Yeah.
That was early for computers, right?
Yeah. Basically, I arrived 88 for 2 years that I worked there, and then then in January 1990, I decided that it was time for me actually to just start my own business. So I was making at the time $80 an hour for providing computer consulting, which at the time was actually not bad. So I started the day actually that they published on the largest newspaper called the London Free Press, that on the front page said, "Worst time to start a business." It was an economic crisis there. They were introducing the tax there called GST, the equivalent of the VAT or TVA in France.
Yeah.
And so I figured, well, a lot of business are going to need some help to computerize to be able to deal with those taxes. So
Nice.
That's how I started. And the reason why actually I didn't go into renewable energy, like at that time also, the price of oil was very low. They after the energy crisis in the late 70s, early 80s, whatever, the things had changed. And so I thought, well, just for a while, I'll work in IT. And so that's what I did. And I did that for 10 years about.
With your own company, I love that too. Like when the economy gives you the indication that it's the worst time to start a business, you made it a huge opportunity to.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, every time there's a big challenge, that also means a big opportunity.
Yes.
And I consider myself what some people call maverick or black sheep. I kind of like to do, not what the majority of people do, not just to be able to do the opposite, but just that I find that it's typically like not the best thing to do, to follow the masses.
No.
So for my first 3 years in Canada, I was in London, Ontario, which is about halfway between Toronto and Detroit. It's a city that is known for its business schools, got like one of the highest ranked business school in Canada.
Yeah.
And I got married back then also. And then I visited the National Capital Region of Canada and fell in love. I was missing very much in London. I was missing very much the European type of atmosphere, or the French. They were more Portuguese people there than French people, French speaking people, even Quebecois. So 1991, I moved to the Ottawa area, moved to Ottawa.
Mm-hmm.
And continue my business there with a focus on doing government consulting. That was another strategy. Also, I wanted to find my way to be able to influence public policies and find my way through government. So I started to do more and more government contracts. And
that was still related to the software?
Yeah. So initially I was like focused more on retail software, like point of sale and things like that. And then when I moved to Ottawa, it was more like all kinds of different tools. I started to teach like things like desktop productivity. At some point, I was teaching over 50 different type of productivity applications, like the Microsoft Suite, databases, and all the competing also products from Corel and other type of vendors like WordPerfect and things like that. But then I started to do more and more like programming, database, and then programming. I became Microsoft certified trainer, Microsoft certified solution developer, which is the highest level of certification for Microsoft. I became the first cold fusion professional in Canada.
Wow.
And I worked with colleges, and at some point I got, interestingly, I started to teach more and more for a college called Willis College, which is one of the oldest colleges in Canada. It's a smaller college, but down the road, actually, I became the dean of the head of their clean energy department.
Wow.
So that's in 2002. After I had started actually to do some consulting work for the Canadian Solar Industry Association, which now is called actually Canadian Association for Renewable Energy. They merged with the other sector, the wind sector and all that. So I had done like some consulting, and I started to teach actually for the Solar Industry Association. I got a contract actually to do like case studies and to do publications on different applications for solar energy in Canada. At the time, it was mostly solar thermal, like solar water heating, solar air heating, type of things. Solar photovoltaic was still quite expensive back then, but it was starting to be on the radar. And then I started to teach more and more project feasibility analysis for renewable energy. And so I got to train actually on a software that was developed by the Government of Canada, a division called Natural Resources Canada, with the funding from the UNEP, the United Nations Environmental Program. So the program is called Red Screen, and I became one of the top trainers in Red Screen. And the first courses that I gave actually was I trained all the project officers at the time for the Canadian Federation of Municipalities, project officers that were in charge of evaluating the feasibility of implementing different type of renewable energy technologies in municipalities. So that covered like wind and hydro, small hydro, as well as bioenergy and 4 different forms of solar energy. So of course, solar thermal, so that's solar air heating, solar water heating, and also passive solar energy, just through the design of buildings. And
Was that then how you got also into the consulting as you were teaching it?
yeah, that's right. So I was teaching, and then they had some people, of course, across Canada. So they had initially we had mostly people coming to Ottawa, where they have the head office of the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. And then some of their people were across, and initially I was just emailing the stuff, and then we started to put an online platform. So we started using like some product, like some commercial product, and then we move on to basically some open source content management that we still use, and like some platform that I since then also pretty much we decide to embrace as much as possible the open source appropriate technology movement, which is more collaborative type of approach versus closed systems, such as the Microsoft Suite, for example. So using the Microsoft Word and Excel and that. Now we use the Open Office. We use for servers, all the what they call the Linux applications, Linux, MySQL, and so forth, Apache.
Yes. And is that then also how you got more into the development aspect as well?
Yeah. So,
or how did how did it then lead to your current businesses?
So yeah, how that led to that is that initially, so I was doing more and more training, and then through the training, I had a lot of clients that just wanted to get some help also on their actual projects. So, for example, initially I was contacted by, for example, a utility in Ontario called Peterborough Utilities, and they wanted to, to get consulting on how to install
utilities for what, or what does it mean?
Basically electric companies like EDF in France.
Oh yeah, yeah,
right?
yeah. Got it.
So, except that in North America, it's not. It's more decentralized. So there's more like local type of energy companies, and sometimes like municipal energy companies. So I started to work more and more for electric utilities, as well as like big industries. I had for 3 years, I had a contract also where my company, GPEKS, which was started in 2002, GPEKS Constructions. So we had a contract with the world's largest manufacturer of solar air heating, Conserval Engineering, based in Canada, and we're the exclusive rights for Africa. So I started to roam around Africa. I worked extensively there with the Kenyan Tea Development Agency, which is an organization that had at this time about 50 different factories that burn the equivalent of about 1 million liters of diesel per year for each of the factories. Either that or they were using huge amount of wood. So I worked, I had an agent in Africa there, in Kenya, and that represented me for the African continent. And so we did a lot of work there, visiting the factories and doing feasibility studies and all that.
For renewable energy
at the time
project,
it was solar, focus on solar thermal, solar air heating, and also looking at how they can use different. I mean, they were at the time they were mostly looking at using hydro, but more and more they're starting to realize that hydro was quite intermittent. There was small hydro, so sometimes either they had floods or droughts. So they needed to have solutions that were complementary to that. Some of them started to use a little bit of wind, but again, like the hydro and the wind, it's very site specific, where solar is pretty much everywhere. Even like from the poles, you can there's not that much variation. So we also looked at using solar thermal, like for example, solar water heating. Basically for the tea drying, they have those big fans that they they blow under the troughs, the tea troughs, and impressive.
Where in what country was that in Africa?
In Kenya.
Kenya.
Yeah, Kenya. But I've done a fair amount of work there all over Africa, and specifically, for example, worked for gold mining companies. I don't know if people are aware of that, but Canada actually has more head offices for mining companies than any other country in the world. For example, there's a company called I Am Gold, which has operations in Africa and Latin America, and we help them do feasibility study for looking at initially all the different type of energy they could use to reduce the amount of diesel oil that they use for their heavy machineries. So in the end, we kind of focused on, after several rounds of feasibility there, we focused on looking at solar energy, which was the most promising and most viable technically and economically. And so I've done a number of things like that. And,
Nice.
and then worked with also some other organization that asked me to give some consulting, for example, the World Bank, different development banks like regional development banks, Inter-America Development Bank, African Development Bank, and so forth, Asian Development Bank, and did a number of workshops for a company based in Singapore, Asia Edge, Power Edge, Asia Edge. So they with them they gave some training and for governments and utilities in Asia, in the Philippines, Malaysia, Indonesia.
And then this was like GPEKS started with really the energy aspect, consulting in the energy field, right? And then how did the real estate development part got included as well?
So what happened is that in the last 5 years or so, I decided to focus a bit more on energy as integrate into in buildings. So can't remember exactly when that was, but I think it was maybe less than 7 years ago. I had a contract from the government of Canada to look at how we can integrate different renewable energy technologies to be able to reduce greenhouse gas emissions in buildings. So I was commissioned to do that study, and I hired a bunch of engineers and people worldwide. And so we came up with basically some solutions in terms of how we can build better, and not only actually to reduce greenhouse gas, but the very interesting thing that happened as a result of that study is that we saw that we could also build more cost effectively by integrating technology in a specific way. That's kind of what prompted the turnaround there. To refocus on buildings, which initially when I studied in France at the University of Perpignan, that was my first university degree, and so I was coming back to that area and refocusing on that, and then I started to do a fair amount of consulting for developers, and a few years ago I realized, developers in builders in North America are very conservative, and I find it's very, very difficult for them to embrace change. So that prompted me to go and basically shift the focus on doing project development myself directly.
So you can have the impact, or you can make the change that you wanted to see.
Exactly. So instead of being
we talked about it in our earliest conversation. Oftentimes it feels that consultants, also myself, we're sometimes at the wrong side of the table when we have to deal with the developers. It's okay. It's normal. They have their calculations and their systems. They always work in such ways. But then it can become very difficult to apply new systems, even if they are proven to work very well and like there's proof that it works. Still, it's difficult to change that. So I really admire that you then took the step to say, okay, I'm just going to start doing it myself.
Right.
Was that mostly focused on housing or also other building or other development?
Well,
or is it still today focused on housing?
Yes, it's actually all of it.
Factories even as well?
Yes. So right now we have a concept that we've been working on for quite a few years that we're right now about to deploy in 2025, and then to use those projects as pilot project to deploy across Canada. And so the pilot that we have cover at the same time residential, but initially we have just some smaller buildings, but we also have plans for multi-unit residential, 8-unit buildings, as well as mixed residential and commercial, industrial, as well as agricultural buildings, such as passive solar greenhouses with aquaponics. Okay.
Yes.
And even buildings that relate, for example, to transport infrastructure, such as the train stations for the elevated rail that we're developing there, called the string rail transport, which is a fifth generation rail type of technology.
For high-speed trains, right?
High-speed trains, intercity that can go up to 500 kilometers an hour.
What? Is it like in Japan that they have like the reverse magnetism, so it actually floats? Or is that not? How can you get a train to go at 500 per hour?
So, first of all, you just don't put it on the ground, but you elevate it, and then you don't use rail. Okay, you use, in that case, they call it string rail because they don't want to use the word cable, but it's like some type of cable structure. So, yeah, if you're interested, you can look at our website, gpeks.com/rail.
Yes.
GPEKS.com/rail. I will show you what it looks like and why it's not only so much more faster to operate, faster to the speed, but it's not only the speed of operate. It's also the speed of deployment, the cost, which is a fraction of the cost compared to any other form of rail, and much more healthy.
I'm looking at it now. It's really floating in the air.
Yeah, it looks like it's floating, but it's actually sustained by a special type of cable. So it's kind of hard to describe. So that's why I would encourage people to go to the website to
yes. Yeah. I think I've seen that in Saudi Arabia when I was working there. Is that possible?
So they have a project in UAE, the Sharjah it's called, that is operational, and they've had a demonstration project in Eastern Europe there for over a decade now, and they've reached the point where they've achieved all the certification for international transport. So it's now a mature technology that's ready to be deployed and commercially.
Yeah.
So we're working on development there, and have the ambition to connect the largest port of Eastern Canada to Windsor, going through Quebec City, Montreal, Toronto, and other cities along the way.
Nice. How long is it usually by car?
I don't know exactly by car. But, here looking, it's over 1,000 kilometers.
Yes.
So
it would, with the train system, it take 2 hours, and today it probably takes what?
Well, the thing is,
10 hours.
Yeah. Right now, there's no connection actually. Canada has a very, very poor rail system. I mean, it has a train that goes, from the Via Rail, it's called, trains that go from at least Montreal to Toronto, and but going through Ottawa. But and they have a train also that goes across Canada, but it's like one line that goes across Canada. When you compare
such a vast distance. Canada is the second largest country in the world. It's crazy to build that infrastructure. In
terms of intercity train, it's very, very poor. And actually, in North America, they only build one intercity line in 100 years. Like that's in Florida, and now it's operated by the Virgin people from Europe. So it's really behind. We have a rich country and continent with very poor infrastructure.
Yeah.
When you compare that to not only Europe, but look at Asia, or even many parts of Africa, much more, or Latin America. It's just amazing. So, anyways, that's the thing that we do, that we're working on. Those are very long development type of projects.
Yes.
Normally, just even a regular train project that really has established, it takes 10 years to deploy. But here, because working on a new technology, it's a little bit longer initially to get the initial permits, but then the speed of deployment actually is about 3 times faster. And the cost, for example, so instead of paying like the O train in Ottawa, the supposedly light rail transport, which is not that light, the first phase costs over 330 million per kilometer, Canadian dollars. The technology from string rail there can be done for well less than 20 million per kilometer Canadian.
Wow.
At this point, it's estimated closer to $10-15 million US at the very most.
Wow.
Worst case scenario.
That's a big difference, yeah.
A huge difference, yes. And of course, now we have those what I call white elephants, of those type of legacy type of romantic type of train that don't work in our climate. Canada, with especially with climate chaos. It's not even climate change anymore. It's climate chaos, where you can have from one day to the next such big fluctuation in temperatures that the traditional rail they just cannot handle that well. The expansion and contraction on those rail.
Interesting. Wow.
The amount of ice and snow that we can get, we can get huge amount. Like north of Toronto, there just before Christmas, they had over something like 1.5 meters in a few days. And then it can melt or turn into ice, and this is absolutely insane now what we experience in Canada. We've had those ice storms where the power lines collapse from the weight of the ice.
Mm-hmm.
Floods and storms, and big fires. We had huge fires in northern Quebec like a couple of years ago. This year in Alberta also, they just had to send recently a check for $100 million just to be able to rebuild all those houses that are made of wood. That's basically residential construction is made of wood in North America, and it rots, it burns, it shifts. It's a living material, right? So foundations are not stable often with that, and sometimes even after a few months, you got rotting and mold. The roofs, of course, also are built with asphalt, petroleum material that just don't last. You got to change maybe 12 to 17 years on average, and the whole industry, construction industry, is based on waste and huge. That means huge initial cost and operating cost. And then the government wonders, why it just there's not enough housing. Canada brought a couple of years ago. They brought within the last couple of years 1 million immigrants. Okay, when before that we had never more than 500,000, and the building industry can only manufacture enough housing for reasonably for maybe 200,000 or 300,000 people. So there's it's totally insane what's happening. It's not and then when we use wood in Canada to make those wood frame houses, some people call that stick frame houses, whatever. Each house requires the deforestation of about 1 acre, but a bit less than half an hectare of mature woods. And so we're destroying our forest to build houses, and then those forests, of course, are when they're gone, you have no regeneration there. The best way to sequester the carbon is actually in the roots of the trees. and vegetation. And
Exactly.
if you kill those trees, they're not going to provide their regulation function in terms of humidity and the ability to have more stable type of rain. In terms of also filtration of the quality of the air, the oxygen they produce that we need. And the wood industry says, oh well, it's renewable energy. It's a renewable resource. Yeah, well, it's going
If you need 1 million houses,
it's going to take another 50 years before those trees to be mature. And can we wait 50 years? For basically, and even then, often they replant. Sometimes they don't replant, or they replant with like monoculture, and they kill
if you need
biodiversity.
1 million houses a year, that is how much forest? You said half a hectare, right?
Well, I mean, it's 1 million immigrant doesn't mean 1 million houses, because
no, but you need new houses.
But
let's say 250,000 new,
right.
or 200,000 even. That times half a hectare per house, you said?
Yeah, roughly.
So yeah, that's 100,000 hectares a year that you need to build those houses.
Yeah,
at least.
Between that and the forest fires, and the ice storm that break the trees and basically make them become diseased and all that, we're and then we're killing the ability of our oceans to produce the oxygen, because we're killing the plankton by making the ocean so acidic that kill the plankton. We're with our modern agriculture, all the chemicals are flushed away into the rivers, which end up in the oceans, and the oceans are used like a massive garbage and sewage. And the plastics are just also there and contributing to deteriorating, basically, killing life. Mm-hmm. So we need to certainly. I think we've reached the stage where we need to be more than green. We need to be more than sustainable, which is an upgrade from green. We need to become regenerative, and regenerative means that we've got to not just do, energy efficient buildings, or energy or better agriculture. We need to go to better than sustainable development. Sustainable mm-hmm. development, that's passé. That's we need to go into regenerative development. We need to reverse the damage that's been done to the earth,
yes,
to the air. The first stage of ecology was like the green movement. With that, actually, we've realized that there was been a lot of greenwashing. Everybody wanted to be green, and green was gold and all that. But truly, when you scratch behind the surface, it was just a little varnish of green. Mm-hmm. But inside, it was very brown and whatever color. Then we've talked about the UN promoted sustainable development, and that, which is an improvement actually from green, which is a longer term type of view. Nevertheless, sustainable development is not enough, because we've mm-hmm. done so much damage to our ecological system that we need to reverse that damage. And whatever we do now, we need to actually do it in a spirit of regeneration, in a spirit of basically reversing those damages. Yes, and that can be done at all levels. That can be done at level of agriculture. That can be done at level of building. And in terms of agriculture, for example, there's a movement called regenerative farming, where they use non-till farming. Mm-hmm. What they've realized, there's a very interesting documentary about that called Common Ground.
This podcast is brought to you by the Garden of Your Dreams Masterclass. Are you struggling with finding the right tools and tricks for your garden? Are you lacking the confidence to be a self-sufficient gardener? Do you sometimes get overwhelmed by the lack of knowledge and time you have to actually do gardening? Then the Garden of Your Dreams Masterclass is for you.
We had a few regenerative farmers on already.
Yeah.
So we talked about there's another beautiful book called The Plowman's Folly, which is a book about a guy that already started writing in 1800s the bad effects of plowing and the industrial system. So yeah, that's definitely super important. And we're also applying that to a certain degree on our own family farm. and yeah, it works. So it's totally possible, and I like what you say about, okay, we shouldn't just do things a little bit less worse, because that's what sustainability is. Like, okay, we'll decrease greenhouse gases, or decrease this by 50%, decrease. It's like, okay, that's like saying, okay, let's do things the same way, just a little bit less harmful, which is not a solution. We have to reverse it, like you say.
Yeah.
And I think the beauty is when you really do it, that there's so much benefits that you didn't even think of, that all of a sudden you all get all these other benefits. So I'd love to talk more about this in the construction industry. We talked about the materials that you used already offline. Can you sketch for our listeners, like, what is the ideal, let's call it the ideal regenerative building?
Okay. So in order to get there, let me just go from where we are and where we've been. Okay. In the past, in the last few thousand years, we actually used natural materials. We used whatever was available, wood, stone, and all that. And then in the last century, in a few decades, we've basically relied a lot on concrete and steel, and very energy intense type of processes, and on in North America for low-rise buildings, building less than, let's say, four-story. Mostly they're done from wood and pine. So
yes,
which relies on typically monoculture, and you clear cut and then just replant fast-growing creotrops, which create many problems. Mm-hmm. So in terms of residential, mostly like low rise in outside of big cities, it's or just in the suburbs, it's wood frame construction. And in the big cities, the downtowns, those office towers and those industrial buildings, commercial plaza, all that, it's concrete and steel, right? The problem I'm going to start with the problem with, and then we'll go to the solution, okay? Mm-hmm. So I'll start with the residential problem. The wood frame construction, well, first of all, it can be very expensive. We've seen during COVID that the price can really fluctuate incredibly. Like we had a price that could go like 4 times higher, mm-hmm. When there was supply chain disruptions, and and also sometimes they bring wood from fairly far. Like some of the green builders, they bring wood in for buildings in Canada from Europe, from Germany, for some of the passive solar houses, and I find that so ridiculous. Mm-hmm. And as I say, so there's a problem initially, just the fact that you deforest when you use that. You use monoculture, and then in terms of let's say, even if we start from the perspective of the people who live in those houses, okay, those houses are not healthy. The current model in North America, we use wood and plastic, and we encapsulate the wood and material that can rot into those vapor and water barriers. And anytime that basically you got more than 80% humidity, then those living materials will rot. And the 80% humidity, happens. Basically, you cannot really prevent it because there's always perforations in the plastic, and human activity alone, taking showers or cooking, and that is going to create conditions where you have more than 80% humidity in your rooms. But on top of that, in many parts of Canada, we're going to have a very humid climate. In the summer, over 80-90% humidity, so that goes into the walls, because there's again those leaks. There are those leaks. So you end up with houses that are basically toxic.
Yes.
Mold. Okay, and then people suffer from chronic disease, from depression, mental issues, and all kinds of things like that. Now, of course, in our cold climate, a lot of people spend a lot of time indoors, They spent even more during the COVID, of course, where they were confined and, house arrest type of confinement. And beside that, also, you encapsulate a lot of the toxics that you have in your house. A typical house, of course, got those products that of gas, okay, volatile organic compounds, from the paint, from the life retardants, from the furniture, the melamine and the formaldehyde, from the glue of the the different furniture.
Yes. So yeah, it's really clear that like the housing is in a big problem, especially in Canada or globally with the use of concrete or wood. So where do you see are the big solutions to change that? And also, what are the opportunities for that?
Yeah. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to go, before I go into the solution, go into maybe some of the major issues that we have, and then in residential, and so that people really fully understand, because I don't want to skip that, because that's what I've talked about. The first one is like the health aspect is one thing. Then there's the comfort aspect, which basically those buildings can be, we rely on mechanical system, for example, for the air conditioning, which is noisy. You don't have thermal mass, so when basically it gets hot, because there's no thermal mass, then people have to use air conditioning, because there's no basically the control of the hydrometry, the humidity in the house. In the summer, it's too humid in Canada. In the winter, it's too dry. Okay, so that creates basically a feeling of comfort that you need to compensate with expensive mechanical equipment that tend to fail or not be maintained properly. So those passive houses, they're not passive because they rely on actual mechanical systems for ventilation, which people typically don't maintain properly. So all the mold and the toxin that are distributed through the vents, and we circulate all that, all those toxins, and it's noisy, and it also creates like a thermal bridges, those metallic vents. So that's another problem. Then there's the problem of the fact that those houses basically burn. Okay, we have a lot of forest in Canada, and a lot of people live in outside of the cities with trees, and we've seen not only in Alberta, but many parts of Canada, we've had like experience incredibly more and more fires because of the climate chaos, climate change, where you have no rain, all of a sudden, it's the rain comes once, but you can be now many months without rain, and you can have the rain of 1 year fall in one day. This can be really crazy. So we can have a much higher risk of a fire, and much higher risk also of basically of the building being, the grounds can shift no more because of global warming and climate change. So the foundations are not, also the way they do the foundation is not resilient. The roofs are made of asphalt, etc. So there's and then there's no consideration taken for the environment, for the sun. So there's no concept of basically passive solar housing. Typically, like most builders don't worry about that, especially people who do like multi-housing. If people do a self-built, they will take that into consideration, but no. So you have that on the, let's say, that problem. And then what that ends up doing also is that ends up costing a lot of money. So now we have buildings that are not comfortable, not healthy, expensive, take a long time to build, and we don't have enough workers in Canada to be able to build enough houses, and a lot of the workers that the government brings actually are like technology workers, people with masters and PhDs on that. We don't have enough construction workers. So that's another of the issues, which I'm going to explain how basically what we propose addresses all those issues. Mm-hmm. On the other side, okay, for commercial or industrial buildings, then we have basically rely on concrete and steel. And then those are very CO2 intensive. Okay. The concrete, you know how much the concrete industry represents in terms of CO2 percentage?
No.
The CO2 in the world?
I don't know.
That's about as much as the whole transport sector.
Wow.
It's close to like 8%, 7-8%.
Yeah, they have to heat it very hot to like 1,000 degrees, right? To make cement.
Yeah. And then
glass.
Yeah. And then basically there's only a very few companies that control that industry, like Lafarge, and companies like that are pretty much like they have a quasi monopoly. And what we've seen also is that the price of concrete has increased so much recently that some of the builders are discouraged and they're just quitting the whole industry and saying, well, some people are retiring early or whatever, or leaving because it's just they cannot make a profit at the current prices of concrete. And then what happens when you put concrete with steel?
It rusts. Yeah,
it corrodes, right? So that's why we have all those problems in Canada with our infrastructure that is rotting away, that is corroding, like the bridges in Montreal, famously like public danger, and or the tunnels, for the train, or that they've got to spend huge amount of money every year to maintain those.
Same in Brussels as well. Yeah.
So we've got all those costs, and what is the actual maximum strength. Okay, when you make concrete, when did it reach the maximum strength, in your opinion?
When?
Yeah, let's say if you look over a period of 50 years, when is it going to have the maximum strength?
I have no idea. It's a good question.
Yeah, it's about 1 year after.
No way. Only 1 year.
From that point, basically it deteriorates. Okay, and the material that we use are the exact opposite. Okay, as they age, they become stronger and stronger, and after a few months, they reach basically they cross over and become as strong as steel, and then as concrete and steel, and then So this is another issue, with concrete and steel. That it's not also durable. People think, oh, well, it will last forever. No, it doesn't. Okay, there's so many examples, but so that's the situation that we have. So what is now, the solution for that? Well, if you look in history, we've actually used natural materials, not just like stones, but what was, let's say, the Great Wall of China? What was it made of?
I would say it's stones, but is it wrong? Yeah,
so stone on the outside, but inside it was actually rammed earth, compressed earth. Okay. And it's been standing for how many thousands of years, right? Yeah. I mean, the Inca pyramids, same type of thing. They use compressed earth. The Roman bridges that were used to carry the water and those very tall type of building that you can still see throughout Europe, especially southern Europe.
Aqueducts.
Those aqueducts, they were made of basically compressed earth and lime, right? Natural material. They've been standing for a long time. In Yemen, you see some 7-story buildings completely made of earth material that are still standing. Okay, and they've been basically, and of course, some of those material in the past exposed to the elements were not durable. So, people thought, well, concrete is much better than that. But nowadays, we've actually been able to find ways to stabilize. And so we've gone initially from, let's say, taking the earth and just plastering that onto with wood, the old structures in Europe that were, tend to require a lot of maintenance. Then they started to make some bricks with putting that in a wood frame, and just letting that dry in the sun. But in the around 1900, a Frenchman, close to actually where I was born, close to Lyon, invented the first earth press. And so that was like bringing prefab to earth construction. Wow. And since then, there's been a number of evolutions. So now you have like hundreds of manufacturers of presses in all over the developing world. Most of them in China, but so quite a few also in other parts of Asia and Latin America, Africa, and so forth. So those, you have some of those presses can be operated manually, and some of the presses are automated. The manual press typically will give you like 400 bricks per day, and the automated press with machines, like they can create up to, let's say, 20,000 bricks per production line per day. And it takes about, say, 8, if you have a double wall on the outside, like for cold climate, it takes about 8,000 to 9,000 bricks for typical, like, unit of maybe, let's say, 90 square meters. Sorry. Okay. About 1,000 square foot.
And then you could actually do that on the construction site, or is it better to have it decentralized or centralized production and then bring it to the site, or how does that look practically?
So practically, in the vast majority of the world, you have earth with enough clay to be able to make the bricks, just from the foundation, the excavation from the foundation. Now, if you go with a low-rise building, like less than 3-story, you have more than enough on the land, where you are. In the very rare situation when you don't have at least 10% clay in the soil, then you can get it from typically not very far. It's unless
so you need 10% of clay content at best, or at least.
Well, yeah, I'm not exactly sure the exact composition, but you need a certain amount of clay, and sometimes when you have too much clay, you need to add some aggregates, like you could add some sand, or things like that. And unlike the what we call adobe buildings, which have also some straw or sometimes organic material, here we're focused on just the material that have just the earth and the a stabilizer, which when you have typically mostly a clay soil, use a lime. If you had mostly like a sandy soil and you really had no way to get some type of clay in there, then you could use some cement, but we avoid. And even if you had to use some cement, that would be like 5 to 10%. Whereas the lime there, you can use like 2 to 8% maybe of lime, according to every time you got to do some analysis of the earth that you have, but it's not get it.
No.
So
then it's mostly done on site, or how does it work?
Yeah, so you can actually what we do at E3 Habitat, which is the organization that I co-created there with architects and engineers and other people, is we either we supply the designs that people can manufacture the machine, or they can buy the machine if they don't have the ability to do some the capability to just work with metal, and that can be done for less than $3,000 typically. One way or the other. The nice thing about making your own machine is that you can just make several machines, and of course you have economies of scale as you make several. So if you have a larger development, so you want to do like 2 production lines, be able to produce like 800 bricks a day instead of 400, you could do that.
Nice. So you're already deploying that system on some of your own projects?
So yeah, we bought a property in the National Capital Region where we're deploying there a number of those pilot houses for 2025. Right now we have 3.
Was that the project we talked about already before?
Yes.
Offline?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So,
maybe you can explain it a bit more from the overall idea of what you want to do there.
Sure. So one of the sites that we just secured is a site which will allow us to do at the same time some recreational-touristic buildings. We have a campground. We're going to have a spa. We're going to have also a passive solar greenhouse. We're going to build for the staff. The person who's selling us solar the property also wants his house to be built out of this material. We're going to retrofit. We have 10 buildings on the site. We're going to retrofit them. Right now they have just a wood frame and a metal roof. We're going to retrofit them with those compressor bricks, insulate them. And we have a number of projects also in the Ottawa area. There's one site where we're looking to do 3 buildings of 8 units. There's a site, different sites in the Gatineau Hills, just north of Ottawa, where we're looking to do 330 units in the next 3 years.
330 units?
Yeah. And those projects, it will be a pilot for a deployment across Canada to the 292 off-site, off-grid, Aboriginal native communities that are, not connected to the grid, or where people pay also. So all those projects that we do, by the way, not only they have earth bricks, but also they are fully autonomous in terms of energy for both the heating, cooling, electricity, and local transport through electric vehicles. There's enough excess electricity there to be able to provide all the needs for local transportation for the residents. And those are, by the way, those development there, initially the first development, we're basically selling the houses, but our strategy is to focus on co-op housing and what we call intentional communities. So those are communities where basically people will be able to live in a healthy house that is more comfortable and also less expensive. Because we're able to build for at least half the cost compared to traditional construction with those bricks.
That's crazy.
At least half the time.
Half of the price of the wood construction.
Yeah, because basically
the quality is so much better.
Yeah. Well, in a traditional construction, you have the siding on the outside, then you have the water and the vapor barriers. You have the wood frame. You have the insulation. You have the drywall. You have all the patching for the drywall. You have all the paint. Just the paint in a house now can cost like over $10,000 per unit. $10,000 to $15,000.
With the earth bricks, you don't have to paint.
So with the earth bricks, with the earth bricks, basically those are beautiful and they can be used for the exterior wall and for the interior wall. And in between, we use natural insulation from fibers. So we've designed the building in such a way that the walls are protected, so that we don't need to have like on the outside some type of parement in French, some type of siding. Siding, yeah.
Nice.
So and also we use like sliding shutters, wood shutters that also add insulation, so they also protect the wall. And on the south side, we've got basically a sunroom that are integrated, so that the whole basically southern area is already, the wall is protected, and we've got generous overhangs all around. So it's designed that we need a absolute minimum amount of siding, exterior siding. We may just add some for aesthetics, a bit to create a little bit of a contrast, but. And inside also we can use the walls as is. So basically you just have the earth inside, outside of the wall, the natural fiber insulation, and then inside also just one layer of bricks. So it's very, very simple, very fast. You can build, for example, those units. Briques de Guyane, for example, they build every 100 square meters, roughly 1150 or 60 square foot. They can build that in the equivalent of 8 days with 6 people. From the point that the foundation is done, 8 days, the wall, the roof, the electricity, the plumbing, all the finishes.
8 days.
8 days, 6 people. Okay. Now they don't put insulation there. It's going to cost us a bit more for the insulation, and because of our regulations here in Canada, it's going to be a little bit tricky. So even if we had a couple more days, and that's also not necessarily using the most efficient processes. We intend to put in place some really processes to make things much more efficient. But another thing is that those buildings, they can be built like Legos, so you don't need specialized labor. We can actually use the unemployed people or those homeless people. We can provide jobs for them. Very easy, just basically handling those about 7-kilogram bricks. 30 centimeters by 10 by 10 roughly. And they are interlocking, so they like Legos. You just stack them on top of each other. Just pour a little bit of liquid lime dirt as basically in between each layer, but just so that you don't even have 1 millimeter of gap. Very, very easy, very fast, and we are planning to use the model of Habitat for Humanity so that the future occupants can participate in the construction and reduce their the price of their.
That's so cool. I would love to build my own house with that system.
Yeah.
So let's. I think we can talk more about the housing project, but we have to be a bit wary of our time. It's very nice to talk to you and have all these discussions, but I'd still love to hear a bit more about your work in your master program, that you also started then creating a master program in international development, right? How did that idea become, or how did that happen?
Yeah, so after teaching for well over a decade, project development for large infrastructure projects, such as energy project, which often are like millions, tens of millions of dollars. Then I decided that we can apply exactly like the same type of approach and teach project development for not just energy, but energy and construction by doing basically a program on real estate land development or real estate development. Yeah. So we have that 1-year program, which is an executive master's, which is targeting the developers worldwide. It's not specific to a particular region, and it basically teaches developers how they can build faster, cheaper, and higher quality. Okay, typically, like for every unit, they can expect to save about $100,000. So
that's great. Wow.
I mean, to do 10 units, you got $1 million minimum saving, like $1 million to $1.5 million, right? We're going to teach the best practices in terms of how to, at every single level, be able to save cost and be more effective from the point of the initial scouting process to the permitting process, all the financing, and all the steps of the development.
And it has the edge of also the sustainability or regenerative aspect as well. Everything that we talked about today.
Yeah, because we focus in that project on how to do communities, not just like a one house. It's like multi-housing type of projects. So that's for the developers who want to do multi-housing and who are interested to do regenerative type of communities, not just, again, sustainable, to do actually what we call positive energy communities. So communities where the buildings produce more energy than they consume, including enough energy for all the building, all the local transport need, and also built in such a way that you also have the ability to produce the food for the community, not just actually for the residents, but also to be able to have integrating those passive solar greenhouses with aquaponics to be able to provide not only the vegetables and the fruits, from the urban forest, edible forest, but also to produce the protein from the chicken and the fish, from the aquaponics, which operate in a closed cycle where the waste from the animals produce the nutrients. And those communities also, instead of treating the waste from humans and kitchen waste on that as a problem, we actually using a system that creates biogas and heat as complementary energy. Yeah.
So the whole community becomes self-sufficient and they have access energy and food. So that's a great system. I'm really curious to see where that is going and to see that happening. So we're going to start wrapping up the interview here. I still have a question for you about what are you most looking forward to in this coming year? That in the next year.
Well, this year is really, I'm very excited about 2025 because I see that this is the year where basically 30 years of research and teaching other people, how to do things, that I'm going to actually have control eventually and do it myself.
Nice.
And actually be the one who's, developing it. And also very excited. I'm a part of a community called Wealth Genius, also a network of 1,200 investors. We're doing a lot of work there. And I'm very excited also to work with those members in Canada and in the US and worldwide. And to work also with First Nation, because this year I'm looking forward to establishing some contacts with not only like First Nation communities in the outer area, like the Maniwaki community, just north of Gatineau, but I'm taking a train ride across Canada, and I intend to actually meet with some of the leaders there in the spring and summer. Yes. So this is going to be very exciting, and next 3 years, basically, just start to deploy that on other communities, and not only in Canada also, but we have projects in Central America, and I'm working on projects in Europe, in France, and been looking at for a few years at some projects close to Valencia in Spain.
Nice.
So
also for the earth with the earth bricks or similar.
Yeah, everything with every time.
Nice. So this is going to be your main focus in the next 3 years at least to really deploy the systems of.
Well, at the same time, we've planted a number of seeds there for floating solar projects, specifically in Brazil, in Asia, Southeast Asia. Africa, Kenya, and other places. So basically,
it's very exciting. There's so many cool stuff happening, right?
Yeah. And something for the train project, where we've got basically right now we've got planted seeds for project in 4 continents. Wow. Canada, I mentioned here, but to connect Argentina to Brazil, to connect Singapore to Bangkok, and South Africa to Egypt. So I mean, those are project that that's going to keep me busy for the next 30 years, but that's what I'm looking forward to. I just keep working on those and make the world a better place.
Nice. I love that.
Safer, cheaper, more affordable, and create jobs, sustain the economy, and reverse the environmental degradation that we've done for the last couple hundred years.
Yes. Yeah, I told you this before maybe, but I really appreciate that you have that drive to do something good for the environment, but also from a perspective of business and to create something and to do good, not necessarily to stop. Like there's a lot of climate action, which is mostly about stopping things. Like we have to slow down the economy or put the brakes on certain things. And maybe we should do that. I'm not saying there's no truth in that, but I think it's better to focus on how can we build an economy that is regenerative, that is giving back to nature. Yeah. Because the benefits are so manifold. I had several other people on the show. When you start to like focus on how can you do it better regeneratively, then all of a sudden you get all these other huge benefits of it. So it's really amazing to see that you're also working in that direction. So thank you for doing that amazing work.
It's an absolute pleasure, and looking forward to work with you on projects that we discussed.
Yes. We'll talk about that offline more. I'm very excited about that as well. And then, is there anything else that you want to tell our listeners, people that are maybe thinking about doing something new in business and they also want to do good in for our planet? What would be your best piece of advice?
Well, my piece of advice, I was very involved in politics. I was involved with the Green Party, and what I've come to realize that if we want to change the world, it starts with every action and gesture that we do. And the best vote is for what we buy every day. And, what type of a vehicle do you buy? What type of house do you want to be in? That will go much further than, I think anything else. Live by example. Be
be the change you want to see, is what Gandhi said, right?
Okay. Think of what Jesus would do, type of thing, right? So yeah, I think that's it's time that we leave the old paradigm behind, and we start embracing not only change, but change for a better world, improvement. Because there's many changes we can do, but let's just rethink and not continue business as usual.
Yes.
Fine. It's 2025. This is a new area that we're entering, and I think there's while there's reasons for concerns, there's also reasons for optimism. So I think we need both, the concern and the optimism, because if you just think that everything is fine, no, it's not. But there are solutions.
Yeah, I think the challenges that we're facing here, at least from what I've come to understand by interviewing people like you and the other people that have come on the show, is that there's so much opportunities in the biggest challenges that we are facing. Food production, huge challenge for the world, but such big opportunity in farming, same transportation. Yeah. Now we talked quite a bit about development or housing, also big problems there.
Yeah.
But all those problems are huge opportunities, yeah.
Maybe I'm going to actually just on that, maybe you could close on that, but I'll say that the biggest opportunities are linked to the biggest challenges. And right now, if we look at the biggest challenges, not only in Canada, but in many parts of the world, okay, we have a housing challenge. Not enough people
prices.
are able to afford housing or to have quality type of housing. We have also a problem with the health crisis. Our social system cannot handle, all the sick people, and so we have an opportunity actually to live in healthier buildings, to eat healthier food, okay, locally produced, okay, and we have a global crisis, ecological crisis, right? With greenhouse gas. And the third big opportunity, which is linked to one of the biggest challenges we have, is the challenge of global warming, what I call again climate chaos. So we have an opportunity to reverse that, not only to slow it down, but to reverse it, thanks to regenerative practices such as regenerative agriculture and regenerative buildings, because those buildings made of earth bricks actually absorb the CO2. We have an opportunity to create jobs, local jobs, using local resources. And we need to just think about, going from that world that's been so reliant on just transporting goods all across the world, just recentering and just being a bit more reliant on local resources.
That is such a great advice. I think it's so important for people to change the paradigm. I fully agree with you. It's not easy to do it, but in a way it's also very simple. And I'm also very hopeful for this coming year that we will see a lot of change happening in the field. So thank you very much for coming on the show and explaining all your amazing knowledge that you have. and all the experience that you have, and that you're now bringing it all together in your own project. So thank you again for coming on.
My pleasure, Mathieu.